Black elderly woman, humiliated at the bank. Luckily, Vin Diesel was there. Some stories begin in the most ordinary places, on a regular day, and yet they end up revealing the truest parts of human nature. That was exactly what happened one late afternoon at the First Pacific Bank on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. The bank was packed, long lines stretching from the service counters to the entrance, customers shifting impatiently, checking their watches and whispering frustrated complaints under their breath. The air was heavy with tension, and the employees rushed back and forth, trying to keep up with the chaos. Behind the counter, Brittany Wallace, a young bank teller with tired eyes and an impatient demeanor, typed away at her computer. She had been at her job long enough to know which customers mattered and which ones didn't. And she had already decided that the older woman standing in front of her was not one that deserved much attention. Linda Carter, a 73-year-old retired schoolteacher, stood quietly, clutching an envelope in her slightly trembling hands. She had always been independent, never one to ask for favors or handouts. But today, she had come seeking answers. She had noticed unexpected fees deducted from her account, small amounts, but enough to make a difference in her already tight monthly budget. Living on a fixed pension, every dollar mattered. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good afternoon," she said politely. "I believe there's been a mistake in my account. I've been charged fees I wasn't informed about." Brittany barely looked up, her fingers still tapping at her keyboard. "Those are standard account maintenance fees, ma'am," she replied flatly. Linda hesitated, holding out her receipt. "But I've had this account for years, and I've never had these charges before." Brittany sighed dramatically, finally glancing at her with clear annoyance. She grabbed the envelope from Linda's hands, flipped through the papers half-heartedly, and then shoved them back toward her. "It's in the fine print of your agreement. If you didn't read it, that's not our fault." Linda blinked, taken aback. Brittany rolled her eyes, loud enough that a few people in line chuckled quietly. Linda felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Look," Brittany continued with an exaggerated smirk, "if you want to avoid fees, you need to keep more money in your account. That's how banks work, ma'am." The public humiliation had begun. Linda's throat tightened. She wasn't trying to argue. She just wanted fairness. She had been a loyal customer for decades. But as she looked around, she noticed how no one was willing to meet her eyes. The same strangers who had been loudly complaining about their own long wait times were now suddenly indifferent to her struggle. "I just want to understand what happened," she said, her voice quieter, but still holding on to hope. At that moment, Carl Jensen, the branch manager, walked over. He had been watching the exchange from a distance, his arms crossed as if deciding whether this situation was worth his time. Carl was a man who believed that time was money, and in his mind, Linda Carter wasn't worth much of either. He cleared his throat and looked down at her with a thin smile. "Is there a problem here?" Carl asked, though his tone made it clear he wasn't expecting an answer. Brittany straightened her posture immediately. "No, sir," she said, quickly as if reporting to a superior officer. "Just a customer who doesn't understand our policies." Carl turned to Linda, his polite smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Ma'am, we have standard fees in place. If you can't maintain the minimum balance, there's nothing we can do." Linda squared her shoulders, gathering every ounce of dignity she had left. "I've always kept my account in good standing," she said firmly. "These fees just started appearing. All I'm asking is for someone to review them." Carl let out a short, amused chuckle. "What's in the system is in the system, ma'am. We don't review automated charges." The final blow came when Carl leaned slightly over the counter and, in a voice loud enough for the entire bank to hear, said, "If you can't afford the fees, maybe this bank isn't the right place for you." A sharp silence filled the room. Linda swallowed the lump in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. She had never felt so small. Then, a deep, steady voice cut through the air. "Why are you talking to her like that?" The entire bank fell silent. Heads turned toward the entrance. A man in a black t-shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap stood there. He looked like any ordinary customer at first glance. But there was something about him, his posture, his voice, his presence, that made people straighten up. Carl turned slowly, his irritation flashing across his face. "And who are you to question how we handle our customers?" The man took a few steps forward, pulling off his cap. The gasps were instant. Vin Diesel, yes, that Vin Diesel, the Fast and Furious star, the action legend. The man who had played some of the toughest, most fearless characters on screen. And now, he was standing in the middle of the bank, staring Carl Jensen down. Carl's confident stance faltered. "Mr. Diesel, Vin raised a hand slightly, cutting him off. His voice was calm, but firm. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said. "What matters is why you're treating this woman like this." Linda turned to Vin, eyes wide with disbelief. Carl cleared his throat, scrambling to regain control. "Sir, this is none of your business. We have policies in place, and this lady doesn't meet the requirements." Vin tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow, knowing smile, he asked, "Policies? Or an excuse to humiliate someone who's just asking for fairness?" A few customers murmured in agreement. Brittany, who had seemed so confident earlier, now glanced nervously at Carl, waiting for him to fix this mess. Vin turned back to Linda, his voice gentler now. "Ma'am, what exactly is the problem? Can you show me what's going on?" Linda hesitated for a moment before handing the envelope to Vin. He took it carefully, scanning the documents inside. After a few seconds, he looked up at Carl, his expression unchanged. "This is a mistake," Vin said plainly. "These charges shouldn't be here. You're going to fix this." Carl opened his mouth, but Vin raised a hand again, stopping him. "If it's a mistake, you'll fix it," Vin continued, his voice steady. "And if it's not," his voice dropped slightly, becoming even more controlled, "then it's going to be a much bigger problem for you." Carl's face paled. Brittany fidgeted nervously. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Carl shifted his weight, glancing at Brittany, as if silently asking for a way out. But Brittany had no answers. Vin crossed his arms, standing firm, waiting for a response. And for the first time that day, Carl Jensen looked truly nervous. Carl Jensen shifted uncomfortably under Vin Diesel's unwavering gaze. The bank manager had spent years perfecting the art of dismissing customers like Linda Carter, people who, in his mind, were too old or too poor to matter. But he had never expected someone like Vin Diesel to step in and challenge him. The weight of the entire room was on him now. Customers who had once ignored Linda's struggle were now alert, eyes darting between the Hollywood star and the man in the stiff suit. Vin's voice was steady, controlled. "This isn't about policies. It's about respect." He turned to Linda, his expression softening. "Ma'am, you said these fees weren't here before?" Linda nodded slowly, still in disbelief that this was even happening. "I've had this account for over 30 years. I've never seen these charges before. They just appeared 2 months ago." Vin turned his attention back to Carl, raising an eyebrow. 2 months ago, so tell me, why did the maintenance fees on her account suddenly triple?" His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that made Carl's throat tighten. Carl forced a small chuckle, trying to regain control. "Mr. Diesel, I don't think you understand how banking works. Fees are adjusted based on policies set at the corporate level. If she doesn't meet the requirements for a premium account, she incurs charges. That's how it's structured." Vin nodded, pretending to consider the explanation. "Right. But tell me, Carl, do you review those charges? Do you actually check if they're correct, or do you just assume the system is always right?" Carl hesitated. He knew he was walking into a trap, but there was no easy way out. "The system is designed to be accurate," he said cautiously. Vin let out a short breath through his nose, an almost amused sound. "So you don't check." He glanced down at the papers Linda had given him, flipping through them quickly. "Here's what I see, Carl. A woman who's been banking here for decades suddenly gets hit with fees she wasn't informed about. When she asks for clarification, she's mocked and humiliated. And now you're standing here trying to tell me it's just policy?" Carl's face turned red. His fingers tapped against his forearm, a nervous habit. We follow guidelines," We don't make exceptions. Vin's expression hardened. That's where you're wrong. You do make exceptions. Just not for people like Linda. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the entire bank, making Carl feel like the walls were closing in on him. Brittany, the young teller, cleared her throat, looking even more nervous. Mr. Jensen, maybe we should just… Carl shot her a glare that made her mouth snap shut. He was losing control, and he knew it. Vin, however, was just getting started. He turned toward the watching crowd. How many of you have had unexpected fees show up on your accounts in the last few months? He held Linda's papers up like evidence in a trial. At first, there was silence. Then, a few hesitant hands went up. A middle-aged man in a work uniform, a young woman holding a baby, an elderly couple near the back. More hands followed. Carl's stomach dropped. This was bigger than just Linda. Vin nodded slowly, scanning the room. So it's not just her. Interesting. He turned back to Carl. You might want to think carefully about your next words. Carl swallowed hard. He was trapped. If he kept dismissing Linda, he'd be dismissing half the people in the room. If he admitted fault, his career could be on the line. Vin didn't give him time to think. Let's check something. He motioned toward the computer behind the counter. Since you're so sure the system is accurate, go ahead. Pull up her account. Let's see those fees. Carl hesitated. Vin tilted his head. What's wrong? Thought you said everything was clear for people who pay attention. Brittany's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Carl shot her a look, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. She had no choice. With shaky hands, she pulled up Linda's account. The screen loaded, the numbers appearing in sharp contrast against the glow of the monitor. Vin leaned in slightly, his eyes scanning the information. A slow smile crossed his face. Well, look at that. He tapped the screen lightly. The fees started 2 months ago, right after a change in bank policy. And not just to her account. He turned back toward the watching customers. How many of you have been here for more than 5 years? Several hands shot up. Vin's smile didn't fade. And how many of you started seeing new charges around the same time? More hands went up. The bank was completely silent except for the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably near the back. Vin turned back to Carl. You see where I'm going with this? Carl's face was ashen now. Mr. Diesel, I assure you, we don't target specific people. Vin held up a hand, cutting him off. You don't? Funny, because based on what I'm seeing, the majority of these new fees are hitting elderly customers. People who are less likely to challenge them. People who might not have the energy to fight back. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. That's not policy, Carl. That's a scam. Carl opened his mouth, then closed it again. His pulse was hammering in his ears. Vin took a step forward, his voice lowering. I don't like bullies, Carl. And I really don't like people who take advantage of the ones who deserve the most respect. He motioned toward Linda. This woman dedicated her life to teaching. She shaped minds. And you're telling me she doesn't deserve basic decency? Carl was sweating now. He knew there was no talking his way out of this. The customers were watching, the employees were watching, and, worst of all, someone was recording. He spotted a young man near the front of the line holding up his phone, filming the entire thing. Vin followed Carl's gaze and let out a low chuckle. Yeah, that's right. This is going out there. So here's what you're going to do, Carl. You're going to reverse every single one of those charges. Not just for Linda, but for every single customer affected. And then, you're going to apologize. Properly. Carl's jaw clenched, his career was flashing before his eyes. Vin stepped even closer. And if you don't? He let the question hang in the air before shaking his head. Well, let's just say I'd be really interested to see how corporate reacts when they find out their branch manager made headlines for defrauding elderly customers. Carl exhaled shakily, his shoulders slumping. He turned to Brittany. Fix it, he muttered. Brittany wasted no time. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, reversing every charge. The tension in the bank began to shift. The nervous whispers turned into quiet approval. Vin watched as the numbers changed on the screen. He turned back to Linda, offering her a small nod. That's more like it. Carl's face was pure defeat, but Vin wasn't done. Now, he said, folding his arms. Let's hear that apology. Carl clenched his jaw. He swallowed hard. Mrs. Carter, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Vin raised an eyebrow. Carl sighed. I apologize for the way you were treated. It was unacceptable. Linda didn't say anything for a moment. Then slowly she nodded. Thank you. Vin glanced around, making sure everyone had seen it. That wasn't so hard, was it? He smiled slightly, turning toward the customers. Let this be a lesson. Speak up, stand up, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't matter. For the first time that day, the room filled with something other than tension. It filled with quiet admiration. And just like that, Vin Diesel turned, put his cap back on, and walked out of the bank. But the story wasn't over yet. The video would go viral, and the consequences for Carl Jensen were just beginning. The moment Vin Diesel stepped out of the bank, the atmosphere inside shifted. The customers, who had initially remained passive, now exchanged murmurs of approval, while the employees behind the counter, including Brittany Wallace, struggled to process what had just happened. Carl Jensen, the once confident bank manager, stood frozen, his face pale and his hands clenched tightly at his sides. He had lost control of the situation, and he knew it. Worse, the young man near the front of the line was still recording. Carl's heart pounded as he turned toward Brittany. Shut that down, now! Brittany hesitated, glancing between him and the computer screen where the reversed fees were still displayed. Sir, Carl clenched his jaw. Now. But it was too late. The young man filming, who had been quiet until now, raised his voice. Already uploaded, buddy. You can't erase this. Carl's stomach sank. A few seconds ago, he had been in complete control, dismissing Linda Carter as just another elderly woman who wouldn't fight back. Now, his name and face were about to be all over the internet. Linda, standing beside the counter, watched the scene unfold with a quiet but growing sense of satisfaction. For the first time since stepping foot into the bank that afternoon, she didn't feel small. She had spent her entire life teaching her students to stand up for what was right. But she had never imagined someone like Vin Diesel would step in and remind her of that lesson when she needed it most. The young man with the phone grinned. Man, this is gonna blow up. People are gonna love seeing you get put in your place. Carl's pulse thundered in his ears. He grabbed his suit jacket and turned sharply, heading straight for his office. He needed damage control, and he needed it fast. But before he could disappear behind his office door, Brittany spoke up, her voice hesitant but clear. Sir, I think we should report this. Carl froze. Brittany continued. We were never supposed to charge those fees in the first place. If corporate sees this, Carl whirled around, his face now bright red. You think corporate is going to back some old woman over me? He laughed bitterly, though the nervous edge in his voice betrayed him. I've been running this branch for 8 years. The sound of a notification alert interrupted him, then another, and another. Phones throughout the bank chimed as customers checked their screens. Linda, confused, looked at the young man still holding his phone up. He smirked. Told you. The video's already spreading. Carl snatched his own phone from his pocket and nearly dropped it when he saw the screen. The video was live. Hundreds of shares already. Comments flooding in. His name, his bank, his behavior, all captured in 4K clarity and now out in the world. A single word escaped his lips. No. Customers in the lobby, now emboldened, no longer whispered. Some muttered in agreement. Others chuckled under their breath, and a few outright shook their heads at Carl in disgust. He could feel the shift, the way the power dynamic had flipped. Minutes ago, Linda had been the one looking down, ashamed. Now, it was him. Then, the phone rang. Brittany glanced at the caller ID. Her eyes widened. It's corporate. Carl snatched the phone from her hand. He straightened his posture, clearing his throat before pressing the device to his ear. Yes, this is Carl Jensen. The voice on the other end was curt and cold. Mr. Jensen, we need to talk. Now. Carl turned on his heel and stormed into his office. Slamming the door behind him, outside the bank settled into an odd silence. The tension was still there, but it was different now. An expectant quiet, like the moment after a storm when the damage is being assessed. Linda exhaled deeply, suddenly aware of how tired she felt. It was over. She looked around at the other customers, noticing that many of them still had their phones out, still whispering about what had just happened. Brittany turned toward her, her posture less rigid than before. "Mrs. Carter, I just want to say I'm sorry for how I spoke to you earlier." Linda studied her, then nodded. "I appreciate that." Brittany hesitated, then added, "And I'm really sorry you had to come here to fight for something that should have been yours in the first place." That, Linda knew, was the real apology. The bank's doors opened, and for a brief moment, a hush fell over the room. Everyone instinctively turned toward the entrance, almost as if expecting Vin Diesel to walk back in and finish what he started. But it was just another customer, a woman with 2 children, looking as exhausted as any working mother on a Friday afternoon. Linda smiled to herself. Vin Diesel didn't need to come back. He had already done what he came to do. A few days later, the full impact of that afternoon hit like an earthquake. The video of the confrontation spread faster than anyone had anticipated. News outlets picked it up, social media exploded, and within 24 hours, the First Pacific Bank's headquarters had released an official statement announcing an internal review of the branch's practices. By the end of the week, Carl Jensen was removed from his position. Corporate cited a failure to uphold company values and multiple customer complaints that had suddenly gained traction following the viral video. Brittany was placed under review, but ultimately kept her job after testifying against Carl, admitting that she had been pressured into following unethical instructions. Most importantly, every single customer affected by the unnecessary fees was refunded in full. Linda watched it all unfold from the comfort of her home. She never thought a trip to the bank would turn into something this big. But as she sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and reading the latest headlines about Carl's dismissal, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of victory. And then, one morning, an envelope arrived in the mail. It wasn't from the bank. It was postmarked from a film studio in Los Angeles. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Mrs. Carter, you didn't need me to stand up for you. You already had the strength. You just needed someone to remind you. Hope this makes you smile. Vin." Tucked inside the envelope was a signed Fast and Furious poster and a personalized invitation to one of Vin Diesel's upcoming movie premieres. Linda laughed, shaking her head in disbelief. She set the note down gently, running her fingers over the signature. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. She felt valued. She felt unstoppable. She stood up, stretched, and walked to her front door, feeling lighter than she had in years. The world wasn't perfect, but now she knew, when you fight for what's right sometimes, the right people show up to fight with you.